Former Master Chief Petty Officer Cole Bennett had lived in self-imposed exile for 3 years in a small single-story house on 5 acres of partially wooded property outside Spokane, Washington, positioned close enough to civilization to receive deliveries and maintain basic utilities, yet far enough that neighbors didn't attempt conversation or casual interaction. At 41 years old, Cole had left the Navy SEALs after a training exercise went catastrophically wrong, resulting in 2 SEAL recruits drowning under his direct supervision during Hell Week surf conditioning operations. Hell Week represented the defining crucible of Bud-S training, 5.5 days of continuous operational training with fewer than 4 hours total sleep, over 200 miles of running, and physical training exceeding 20 hours daily in cold, wet conditions designed to test determination, mental toughness, and ability to perform under extreme stress. The official Navy investigation cleared Cole completely. Environmental conditions exceeded established safety parameters, not instructor negligence. The surf zone had experienced unexpected rip currents, water temperatures dropped below safety thresholds, and visibility deteriorated beyond acceptable limits. But Cole knew the truth. He couldn't speak to investigators. He saw the 2 recruits struggling in the surf, observed their distress signals, and hesitated for approximately 2 seconds while second-guessing whether to pull them immediately or let them push through the discomfort as part of the training evolution designed to build resilience. That 2-second hesitation, born from uncertainty about whether he was observing normal Hell Week struggle or genuine emergency, cost 2 lives when the recruits were swept into a rip current and drowned before rescue swimmers could reach them. PTSD affected 11–20% of veterans, with symptoms including intrusive memories, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and difficulty regulating emotions. Cole experienced crushing survivor's guilt, a specific PTSD manifestation where individuals fixate on perceived failures during traumatic events and believe they should have prevented deaths. The Navy offered him another posting as a Bud-S instructor, recognizing his 15 years of exemplary service and operational expertise. Cole took early retirement instead, unable to face another class, knowing his judgment had failed when it mattered most. His only companion was Ranger, an 8-year-old German Shepherd who'd been Cole's K-9 partner for 4 deployments spanning Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Ranger had sustained traumatic brain injury during an improvised explosive device blast that caused permanent neurological damage, resulting in occasional seizures and balance coordination issues that ended his operational career. When Cole isolated himself geographically and psychologically, Ranger stayed, not out of training obligation, but because the German Shepherd understood Cole's guilt in ways humans couldn't articulate. German Shepherds were known for exceptional loyalty and strong bonding with handlers, particularly after shared traumatic experiences. They existed together in carefully structured routine, morning walks along the property fence line, maintenance work that kept Cole's hands busy and mind occupied, evening hours spent in silence that was simultaneously comfortable and psychologically suffocating. Cole survived financially on VA disability payments rated at 60%, occasional contract work doing remote security consulting he could complete without human interaction, and a vegetable garden he tended with military precision, learned during 2 decades of SEAL service. His property was bordered by a 6-foot chain-link fence, practical for containing Ranger during his occasional disoriented episodes and keeping the outside world at distance. His closest neighbor was an elderly widow, 3 properties over, who left homemade baked goods at his mailbox monthly without expecting conversation. Cole always reciprocated with fresh vegetables, but never spoke to her directly. This isolation was deliberate, psychologically necessary for managing PTSD symptoms and slowly hollowing him out emotionally. But it represented what Cole believed was better than being around people when panic attacks struck without warning in social environments. On a grey March evening at 1740 hours, when overcast skies created early dusk, Cole was conducting his daily fence line inspection, checking for winter damage, a ritual that provided structure and purpose when his mind threatened to spiral into intrusive memories about the drowning recruits. Ranger, who typically followed at a cautious distance due to his balance coordination issues, suddenly exhibited behavior Cole hadn't witnessed in 18 months. The German Shepherd broke into an awkward, lurching run despite his neurological problems, heading directly toward the northeastern corner of the property where the fence bordered dense woods. Ranger was barking, harsh, insistent, the specific alert pattern he'd used during threat detection operations, indicating genuine danger requiring immediate handler response. Cole's tactical instincts activated immediately, despite 3 years of civilian isolation. Ranger didn't produce false alerts. In 7 years of operational work spanning multiple combat deployments, the German Shepherd had never once indicated a threat that wasn't genuinely present. Cole moved toward the corner at a run, pulling his tactical flashlight as dusk deepened visibility. 30 feet from the fence line, Cole's powerful light caught something that made his breathing stop. A boy, approximately 10 years old, collapsed against the exterior side of the chain-link fence, with one arm reaching desperately through the fence links, like he'd been trying to climb over before his strength failed completely. The child was conscious, but barely, eyes unfocused and glassy, face bruised and swollen with visible contusions, blood visible on his torn shirt, breathing in shallow gasps that indicated shock or potential internal injury. Cole's combat medic training overrode everything else. PTSD symptoms, isolation habits, uncertainty about his judgment. He vaulted the 6-foot fence in a single movement rather than wasting seconds running to the gate 20 yards away, and dropped beside the boy for immediate assessment. Pulse, rapid and thready at approximately 130 beats per minute. Breathing, labored and shallow, indicating respiratory distress. Visible injuries, defensive wounds on forearms consistent with blocking strikes, ligature marks on both wrists suggesting restraints, massive bruising across ribs suggesting repeated kicks or beating, possible broken bones based on swelling patterns. This child hadn't gotten lost during an innocent hiking trip. He was running from something life-threatening, and that something had hurt him severely before he made it to Cole's property seeking help. "Hey, stay with me," Cole said, his voice sounding rusty and strange from days of self-imposed silence. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes focused briefly, absolute terror evident in their depths. "Dylan," he whispered through split lips. "Please, he's coming for me. He said he'd kill me this time. Please don't let him find me." Then Dylan's eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness completely. Cole lifted him carefully, maybe 70 pounds, all sharp angles and visible malnutrition, and carried him through the gate toward his house, while Ranger limped ahead with professional vigilance despite his coordination issues, clearing the path. Inside the house, Cole began comprehensive emergency medical assessment, using his combat medic training, checked carefully for spinal injury before moving Dylan further, controlled bleeding from a deep laceration on Dylan's scalp using direct pressure, monitored for signs of internal bleeding by checking abdomen for rigidity, treated for shock by elevating legs and maintaining warmth. The injuries were extensive and unmistakably deliberate, belt marks showing distinctive buckle patterns, what appeared to be cigarette burns on Dylan's upper arms, bruising in systematic patterns indicating repeated abuse over extended time, rather than a single, violent incident. This child had been hurt repeatedly by someone who had regular access and parental authority. At 18:20 hours, Dylan regained consciousness. His first reaction was pure panic, attempting to escape despite his injuries, crying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I won't do it again," in the agonized voice of a child who'd learned through brutal experience that apologies sometimes delayed punishment. Ranger moved to Dylan's side and exhibited behavior Cole hadn't seen since their deployment days. The German shepherd lay down beside the injured person, placed his head gently on Dylan's chest, and made the low, rumbling sound he'd used with wounded teammates, a comfort behavior that communicated safety without requiring words. Dylan's panic subsided enough for coherent speech. "Are you going to take me back to him?" he asked, voice breaking with terror. Cole, whose hands remained covered in the boy's blood from treating wounds, said the only thing that mattered. "No, you're safe here. Who hurt you?" Dylan's answer changed everything about Cole's careful isolation. "My stepdad, Brian. He's a police detective. Nobody believes me when I tell them what he does. He says if I tell anyone again, he'll make sure I disappear like he made my mom disappear." Over the next hour, while Cole treated Dylan's injuries as comprehensively as possible without hospital equipment, the full scope of horror emerged in broken fragments. Dylan Carter, age 10, had been living with his stepfather, Detective Brian Mitchell, of the Spokane County Sheriff's Office for 2 years since Dylan's mother, Sarah, left the family under circumstances Dylan believed were actually murder. Dylan was convinced his mother was dead, despite official reports that she'd voluntarily abandoned her family. Brian had told him she ran away with another man, but Dylan had found her wedding ring hidden in Brian's locked desk drawer during punishment isolation, and Dylan knew his mother would never have left without her ring or without taking him. Detective Brian Mitchell had been systematically abusing Dylan since Sarah's disappearance. Severe beatings disguised as parental discipline, deliberate isolation in a basement for punishment lasting days, food deprivation as control mechanism, escalating violence that Dylan knew with certainty would eventually become fatal. Dylan had tried reporting the abuse to his elementary school counselor 6 months ago, desperately seeking help from the one adult he thought might believe him. The counselor followed mandatory reporting protocols and contacted Detective Mitchell, who arrived at the school in full uniform, presented himself as a concerned father, struggling with a troubled child who fabricated accusations for attention, and took Dylan home under the counselor's sympathetic observation. The beating that night was so severe, it put Dylan in the hospital with injuries Brian explained as accidental fall down stairs. No emergency room personnel questioned a decorated law enforcement detective's explanation. Dylan learned through brutal experience that his stepfather's badge made him effectively untouchable. Who believes a 10-year-old child over a respected law enforcement officer? 2 days ago, Brian had told Dylan He was done dealing with the problem and began openly planning what Dylan overheard as an accident in the woods that would solve everything. Tonight, Brian loaded Dylan into his personal truck for what the detective described as a camping trip to work on our relationship and rebuild trust. But Dylan saw the equipment Brian loaded when he thought Dylan wasn't watching. A shovel, a heavy plastic tarp, and Brian's personal hunting rifle. Dylan understood with terrifying clarity that this trip was one way. Brian planned to murder him and dispose of his body in wilderness where it might never be found. When Brian stopped for gas 20 miles from Cole's property, Dylan made a desperate decision. He ran. Barefoot in March cold, wearing only jeans and a thin shirt, with no plan except immediate survival. Dylan ran through dense woods for hours until physical exhaustion and hypothermia caused him to collapse at Cole's fence line. Too weak to climb over, but reaching through the chain link in a final desperate attempt to find help before Brian tracked him down. Cole listened, with ice forming in his chest, his PTSD symptoms temporarily suppressed by the immediate tactical situation. This was the Hell Week drowning, replaying with different variables. A child in mortal danger, someone in position of authority causing the threat. A choice Cole had to make about intervention when his judgment had already failed catastrophically once and cost lives. But Dylan was bleeding in his living room. Ranger was maintaining protective position with professional vigilance. And somewhere in the darkness, a corrupt detective was hunting for a 10-year-old witness who could expose murder. Cole had no illusions about tactical realities. If he called 911, the emergency dispatcher would route the call to Spokane County Sheriff's Dispatch, Brian Mitchell's own department. Brian would respond in official capacity, present his badge and carefully constructed story about a disturbed stepson with documented behavioral issues, and legally reclaim Dylan before Cole could provide evidence to contradict a law enforcement officer's authority. If Cole refused to release Dylan to a law enforcement officer making official demand, he became a kidnapper under Washington law, a military veteran with documented PTSD holding a detective's child against direct orders. Brian's institutional authority, badge credibility, and departmental backup would overwhelm anything Cole said. But Cole was a Navy SEAL who'd spent 20 years operating in hostile environments where enemies had home field advantage, institutional authority, and superior numbers. He understood how to plan operations against superior forces using asymmetric tactics. While Dylan slept under sedation from over-the-counter pain medication, Ranger maintaining vigilant watch beside the boy, Cole made a tactical decision. He needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed, allies who couldn't be intimidated, an operational plan that neutralized Brian's institutional advantages. Cole used his satellite internet connection to research Detective Brian Mitchell comprehensively. What he discovered confirmed every tactical instinct. Brian's first wife had filed for divorce in 2018, citing domestic abuse with documented hospital visits, then mysteriously withdrew the filing and moved immediately out of state without pursuing any settlement. Brian's second wife, Dylan's mother, Sarah Carter, was reported missing in 2023. The case was officially closed as voluntary disappearance after Brian reported she'd left a handwritten note and cleaned out her bank account. But Cole's investigative training recognized suspicious patterns. Sarah's family reported she would never abandon Dylan. Her vehicle was found at a remote trailhead near a ravine. and the missing persons case was closed within 2 weeks by Brian's own department with minimal investigation and no body recovery. Suspiciously rapid resolution. The critical turning point came at 2200 hours when Cole's property motion sensors activated. Someone was approaching through the woods from the same direction Dylan had come from. Cole's thermal imaging equipment showed a single adult male moving tactically with a weapon clearly visible, heading directly toward Cole's house with purposeful navigation, suggesting he knew exactly where Dylan was. Brian Mitchell had tracked Dylan here using techniques he'd learned during years in law enforcement, and he was coming prepared to eliminate both the witness and anyone harboring him. Cole made a split-second tactical decision that could end his freedom or save Dylan's life. He called 911, but specifically didn't request Spokane County Sheriff response. Instead, he requested Washington State Patrol, FBI field office, and invoked federal kidnapping statute using precise legal language. "This is Cole Bennett, former Navy SEAL Master Chief, calling to report I have a minor child named Dylan Carter, who reports being held captive and systematically abused by Spokane County Detective Brian Mitchell, who I believe murdered the child's mother, Sarah Carter, in 2023, and is currently approaching my property armed with apparent intent to harm the child. I'm armed and will defend this child until federal authorities arrive." Recording this call. The dispatcher attempted to redirect the call to local sheriff jurisdiction. Cole cut her off with tactical precision. "Dylan Carter reports Detective Brian Mitchell killed his mother, Sarah Carter, in 2023, whose remains were never recovered. Mitchell is law enforcement with institutional conflicts. I'm requesting federal response due to corruption concerns. My property is being approached by an armed individual. This call is recorded and live streaming to secure server. Stand by." Then Cole did something Brian wouldn't anticipate. He turned on every exterior light on his property, completely eliminating tactical advantage of darkness, and stepped onto his front porch with Dylan safely locked inside with Ranger protecting him. Brian Mitchell emerged from the tree line, wearing civilian clothes but with his service weapon visible on his hip, carrying a tactical flashlight, perfectly performing the role of concerned father. "I'm Detective Mitchell, Spokane County Sheriff's Office. My stepson Dylan ran away from home. I received a report that a child matching his description was seen near this property. I'm here to collect him and take him home." His voice was calm, authoritative, professionally reasonable, exactly how corrupt authority presents itself. Cole's response was equally calm, but tactically devastating. "Dylan Carter is inside my home receiving medical treatment for extensive injuries consistent with systematic physical abuse over extended period. He reports you murdered his mother, Sarah Carter, and planned to kill him tonight. I've contacted FBI and Washington State Patrol with federal kidnapping and murder allegations. You're welcome to wait with me until they arrive." Brian's professional mask slipped visibly. "You're interfering with law enforcement and parental authority. Release my son immediately, or I'll arrest you for kidnapping and child endangerment." But Cole didn't move. "You're not on duty. You're not in uniform. You have no arrest authority on private property for federal crimes. You're about to be investigated for murder of Sarah Carter and attempted murder of Dylan Carter. Dylan's injuries are comprehensively documented with photographs and medical assessment. This entire conversation is recorded and live streaming. Your options just ended, detective." Brian reached for his service weapon, not drawing, but the threat implicit in the movement. That's when Ranger appeared in the doorway behind Cole. positioned protectively between Brian and the house where Dylan remained. The German Shepherd's body language was unmistakable. Protective aggression, target acquired, awaiting handler command to engage. Brian recognized what he faced: a Navy SEAL on his own property, willing to engage in defense of a child, with a combat-trained K-9 as backup and federal authorities already inbound. Washington State Patrol arrived within 15 minutes. Cole's property was near Interstate 90, and troopers had been dispatched immediately at federal request. FBI arrived within 40 minutes, responding to kidnapping and murder allegations involving law enforcement corruption. When they arrived, they found Cole on his porch, maintaining defensive position, Brian Mitchell in his civilian vehicle claiming jurisdiction, and Dylan Carter with comprehensively documented injuries, telling a story that made seasoned federal investigators' faces harden. A detective who murdered his wife, systematically abused his stepson, and planned to eliminate the witness. The investigation moved with unusual speed once Dylan was placed in protective federal custody and FBI assumed jurisdiction due to interstate implications. Sarah Carter's family lived in Idaho, making her disappearance and potential murder a federal matter crossing state lines. Forensic accounting revealed Detective Brian Mitchell had accessed Sarah's bank account after her disappearance, forging electronic transfers to create the appearance she'd withdrawn funds voluntarily. Cadaver dogs, deployed to locations Dylan remembered Brian visiting repeatedly after his mother vanished, located Sarah Carter's remains in a ravine 30 miles from Spokane. Hidden in shallow burial but not deeply enough to avoid detection once authorities actually conducted proper search. Brian Mitchell was arrested on charges including first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, evidence tampering, attempted kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Spokane County Sheriff's Office placed him on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The case expanded when 3 other deputies admitted they'd suspected Brian was abusing Dylan, but didn't report it because you don't report on another cop. It violates the code. All 3 deputies faced disciplinary action ranging from suspension to termination. Spokane County Sheriff's Office underwent federal oversight for systematic failures that allowed a detective to murder his wife and abuse his stepson for 2 years without any intervention, despite multiple warning signs. Dylan entered specialized trauma-informed foster care with a carefully vetted family screened through reformed CPS protocols, but he struggled profoundly with nightmares and refused to meaningfully engage in therapy sessions despite professional psychological support. Child Protective Services made an unprecedented arrangement based on Dylan's therapeutic needs. Ranger was officially certified as Dylan's therapy animal, with Cole granted regular visitation rights as the dog's handler, requiring his presence during therapy sessions. Over 6 months, Cole visited Dylan 3 times weekly, bringing Ranger, whose calming presence became the foundation of the boy's psychological recovery. The relationship evolved beyond clinical therapy sessions. Cole taught Dylan woodworking using hand tools, age-appropriate survival skills, and the structured daily routines that helped manage trauma symptoms. Dylan asked questions Cole could answer without triggering his Hell Week guilt, not about operational failures or judgment errors, but about dogs, camping, why Ranger had seizures sometimes, how Cole learned to stay calm when scared, what different constellations were called. Simple conversations that didn't trigger panic attacks, healing interactions that worked therapeutically for both of them. The visits forced Cole out of his 3-year self-imposed isolation. He started attending VA therapy regularly, not because he was suddenly cured or his guilt about the drowning recruits had disappeared, but because Dylan asked directly whether Cole talked to someone about the nightmares he obviously experienced. "Ranger found me when I was dying at your fence," Dylan said during one visit. "You helped me when nobody else believed me. Who helps you?" It was the most effective therapy referral Cole had ever received. A 10-year-old child asking why Cole didn't practice what he preached about seeking help when struggling. 1 year after Ranger found Dylan collapsed at the fence, Cole had moved from his isolated 5-acre property to a smaller 2-acre parcel closer to Spokane proper. He'd completed a 90-day residential PTSD treatment program at the VA, maintained weekly therapy appointments addressing his survivor's guilt, and worked part-time with Spokane County Search and Rescue. Teaching wilderness survival skills and child safety programs to volunteers and community groups. Dylan's foster family lived 6 miles away, allowing daily visits that had evolved into informal mentorship. Cole taught Dylan and 2 other foster children from similar abuse situations, forming an unofficial program that gave traumatized children a safe male role model and gave Cole purpose beyond his guilt about the recruits who drowned. Ranger, now 9 years old and experiencing more frequent seizures due to his traumatic brain injury, split time between Cole's home and Dylan's foster placement. The German shepherd who'd found an injured boy at a fence had become the bridge connecting 2 people who understood survival looked different for everyone. Sometimes it meant preventing drowning. Sometimes it meant believing a child when institutional authority dismissed them. Sometimes it meant just refusing to walk past something that mattered even when you're broken and everyone expects you to ignore it. 2 years after the rescue, Cole attended Dylan's permanency hearing at Spokane County Superior Court, where the court granted permanent custody to his foster family who'd petitioned to adopt him. The judge asked Dylan what he wanted to say about the adoption. The boy, now 12 years old and visibly stronger, but still carrying invisible psychological scars, looked directly at Cole. "Ranger found me when I was trying to climb your fence, and I couldn't climb anymore because I was too hurt and scared. Cole saved me when nobody else believed me because Brian was a cop. That's what family does. They find you when you're at the fence and you can't climb over by yourself." After the hearing, Dylan asked Cole the question that had been building for 2 years. "Why did you believe me when I told you about Brian? Everyone else thought he was telling the truth because he's a detective. Teachers didn't believe me. The hospital didn't believe me. Why did you listen to me?" Cole looked at Ranger, who was resting with his head on Dylan's knee, despite having experienced a seizure that morning, and finally spoke the truth he'd been avoiding for 3 years. 3 years ago, during Hell Week training, I didn't trust my judgment when I saw 2 recruits struggling, and they drowned because I hesitated. I've been alone ever since, because I was afraid I'd fail again if I had to make another critical decision. Then Ranger found you at my fence, and I had a choice. Doubt myself again like I did at Hell Week, or trust what I saw directly in front of me. You didn't save me, Dylan, but believing you when everyone else dismissed you reminded me that sometimes the right tactical call is the one everyone else says is wrong. Warriors don't quit just because they made a mistake once under impossible circumstances. We keep going until we get it right. the lonely former SEAL who'd spent 3 years in isolation, believing he was too psychologically damaged to help anyone, discovered that the most important missions don't arrive with official orders or operational briefings. They appear at your fence line at 1740 hours, carried by a combat German shepherd who refuses to ignore a threat even when balance issues make running difficult. Cole Bennett couldn't save the 2 recruits who drowned in the Hell Week surf zone, but he could believe an injured boy when every institutional authority dismissed him as a liar, and that belief, backed by a dog's instinct and a warrior's refusal to fail again, saved a life that law enforcement corruption had written off as acceptable collateral damage to a detective's reputation.